Hello guys, and welcome back to the show. In the last video tutorial, we saw how to use databases in Flask. In today's video, we're going to learn how to use Flask as a REST API for a React.js front end. So we go on to build this simple application, which is a to-do list application, which uses React.js and React routers. We will be able to add to a to-do list. We'll be able to click to get the details of one to-do. We'll be able to delete, and we'll be able to edit as well. Then lastly, we will use React-Sping to animate the to-do list. This will be done using Flask, React.js, and React routers. Let's get into it. The first thing I need to do is to create the React.js application, and I can do that using yarn create React app, my app. So now that this is completed, what I can do is to cd into my app, and then inside of the root of the application, what I'll do is to create a directory called API. Now I'll cd into API, and I'll create a virtual environment by saying virtual env -p python 3 venv. If I'm going too quick for you, then you should check out the tutorial on how to connect a Flask backend to a React.js front end. Now that this is done, what I'll do is to activate the virtual environment. And then once the virtual environment has been activated, what I need to do is to install Flask. So I'll come here and copy this, pip install Flask, and I'll do pip install Flask. Now that Flask has been installed, what I need to do is to create an API.py file inside of the root of my application. So I'll say touch API.py. Then I can open this file. Now the first thing I will do is to import Flask from Flask. So say from Flask, import Flask. I'm not going to explain into details how this is done because I've already done a tutorial on that. So if you don't understand, watch the Flask tutorial before getting into this. So I'll go on and instantiate the Flask application. So I'll say app. Now that the app has been instantiated, I'll say that if __name_ is equal to __ main _ the app.run, and I'll set debug to true. The next thing I'm going to do is to create a view function called index. So I'll say app.root / methods get. And if someone goes to the index, for now, what I want to return is hello world, just to be able to connect the Flask to the React application, and then I can go on and write the view function that I really need. So I will say return. And that's all I need for my view function for now. I'll go on and create a .env file. And in this .env file, I'll put in my environment config. So I'll come to the python.env documentation, copy this, go to the terminal and make sure that the virtual env has been activated. And what I'll say is pip install python.env. I will then go on to say touch.env. Inside of this .env file, what I will say is that the Flask env is development. Let me now start the Flask application and make sure that it is working. So I can go to this URL and actually do have hello world. So now I'll go to the front end and connect the front end to the back end. To do this, what I'll do is to go into the React application, go into my packet.json and create a proxy. So I'll say proxy, and I'll set the proxy to the Flask URL. So I'll copy this, come over here and then paste that here, like so. So now I've set the Flask URL as a proxy to the React.js application. Now the next thing I will do is to create a component inside of my source directory. So I'll say components. And inside of this component, what I will do is to create a components directory called card. So I'll say dash. And inside of this card, I'll create a card.js file. Now, what I'll do is to import React from React. I'll say import React from React. Then I'll create a component called card. And this will be a functional component, which for now returns a div which says hello. Then I need to export this. The next thing I'll do is to create a directory called pages. So the pages is where I'll bring all my components together to create the page that I want on my website. If you don't understand how I structure my React applications, check out the tutorial on how to structure React applications like a pro. So I'll come over here and I'll create pages. And instead of these pages, what I'll do is to create a new file called todopage.js, and I'll import React from React. So I'll say import React from React. Then I'll also import this card from the card component. So I'll say import card from components. The next thing I'll do is to create the to-do-page component. So I'll say const to-do-page, which will be a functional component, and this functional component will just render the card. Okay, so I'll say return, so React fragment, then I'll pass in card, like so. And lastly, I will export this and then pass this to the app.js. So I'll go into the app.js file, get rid of everything here, and then I will import to-do page, so this page, from pages / to-do page. And what I can do is to pass this here, like so. So now if I start the application, I should see hello. Okay, so I'll go on and start the React application. So as you can see, it says hello. Now I know that the front end is working properly. So I can go on and make a fetch request to the back end and see if I can get the data from the back end and use it on the front end. So I can go into the React application, and then on the to-do page, what I'll do is to import use state and use effect from React. So I've now imported use state and use effect from React. So I can go on and create a state. So I'll say const to do, then it's set to do, and this will be use state, which is initially an empty array, like so. And I can go on and say use effect, and what I'll say is that the use effect is that I want to fetch from /API. Now, since we're using the Flask application as a REST API, I need to change the root on the backend to /API. So I'll come back here, and instead of saying slash, I'll say /API, like so. Then I'll go back to the front end and I'll say fetch /API, but then response, if the response.ok, I want you to return response.json, but then data. For now, I want you to console the log, the data, like so. So what I'm actually doing is that I'm fetching data from the /API endpoint, and if the response is okay, I just want to console the log, the data, just to see that the back end has been connected with the front end correctly and everything is working before I go on to add complexity to it. So I'll start the React and Flask server and see if everything is working correctly. And over here, make sure you add an array so that you make one request, else you end up making a lot of requests. So now this is done. Let's see what I get in the console. And as you can see, I get an object called hello. So it means that the back end has been connected correctly with the front end. And if you don't agree, if I come over here and return a list of names, so orange and then apple, I now get an array of orange and apple. So I know that everything is working correctly. So this is how you connect your React.js front end to your Flask application. The next thing we are going to do is actually create the root that will enable us to create the REST API. In order to persist data, we need a database. So when someone goes to the application on the front end, type into a field, we need to be able to store that in a database in the backend. So what I'm going to do is to install Flask SQL Alchemy. So I'll copy this. I have my virtual env activated, so I'll say pip install Flask SQL Alchemy. Again, if you don't know what Flask SQL Alchemy is, check out the tutorial on how to use databases in Flask. So now that this is done, I'll come down here and I'll set inside of my application config the SQL Alchemy database URI. I'll change this to DB. So the next thing I'm going to do is to import SQL Alchemy. So I'll say from Flask SQL Alchemy import SQL Alchemy, like so. So what I've done is to set the SQL Alchemy database URI in my application config, and I've imported SQL Alchemy from Flask SQL Alchemy. The next thing I need to do is to create a model. If you saw in the tutorial on how to use databases in Flask, you need to create a class, which is a model, and that class will be the representation of the data that you want to store in the database. If you don't understand this, make sure you check that out before watching this one. So what I'll do is to create an instance of SQL Alchemy. So I'll say DB will be SQL Alchemy, like so, and I need to pass it the app. Okay, the app is currently none, so I need to pass it this app. So I'll pass it this app, and now what I can do is to create a module. So how you create a module is basically by saying class, I'll call this to do, and this class will inherit from db.module. So I'll say db.module, and it will have two class variables. One is ID, and this ID will be db.column, db.integer, because I want the ID to be an integer field, and then I'll set the primary key to true. The next thing I would like to store is the content field, so what the user puts in the input field. So I'll create a field called content, and this content will be db.column. So I'll copy this, paste that here, and I'll change this db.integer to db.text. Then I'll set nullable to false, which means it cannot be empty. The last thing I'll do is to create the __str_ so that I can get the string representation of this model. So I'll pass in self, and what I want to return is self.id and then self.content. So this __str_ will give me the string representation of this model. Now that I have the database module created, what I need to do is to initialize my database. So I'll go into the terminal and type in Python, and what I'll say is that from API import db, and then I'll say db.create_o, like so. And what this command does is that it created this example.db, which is basically this. Okay, the next thing I'll do is to import the module. So I'll say from API import to do, and I will create an instance of this module and basically see the database with some content. Okay, so I'll say to do is basically to do, and the content that I would like to give it is basically I need to eat. Then I'm going to add this, so I'm saying db.session.add to do. Then I'm going to actually persist this or save this, so I'll say db.session.commit. If you don't understand how this is done, again, check out the tutorial on how to use databases in Flask. So I do have some data in my database. Now I will exit. Actually, let me add one more data into the database. So I'll say second to do, it's another to do, and I'll say content, I need to learn Flask. Then I'll say db.session.add second to do. Then I'll say db.session.commit, like so. So I can exit from here. What I want the index function to do is that when someone goes to /API, what I want to do is to query the data in the database. So I want to get everything that has been stored in the database and then display that on the front end. That is basically what I want my index function to do. Now, I would like to show you guys something. What some people will tend to do was that they will create a variable called to do, and what they will say is that to do.query.all. And they will assume that this will return everything that has been stored in the database. And then what they can say is that return a dictionary of to do. Now, if I start the application, you realize that I'll get an error. Let's see what this error is. I get this error saying that object of type to do is not JSON serializable. So what I need to do now is to serialize the object. So in order to avoid this error, what I will do is to create a to do serializer. So I'll come over here and create a method called to do serializer. And what this to do serializer will do is that it will take a to do and then it will return an object with an ID key, and the value will be set to do.id, and then it will have a content key, and this content key will be set to do.content, like so. So instead of returning an object with a key name and the value to do, what I will do is to import JSONify from Flask and instead return JSONify, which is used to convert something into JSON. And I want to JSONify the map. And as you know, the map takes in a function and an iterable. So what I will do is to pass in the function, and the function will be the to-do serializer. And the iterable will be dayToDo.query.all. So this. So now I can get rid of this. And what I need to do is that whatever is returned by the map, I would like to unpack that, okay? I would like to unpack that into this array. So I need to add a star over here and I will unpack that. So basically now if I start the Flask application, then I go to /API, I now have a list which contains 2 objects. So what the star was doing was that I was unpacking the objects into the array. I hope this makes sense. So now that we have some data in the database, rather than saying console.log data, what I'm going to do is to actually set the data to the data that we get from the database. So what I'm going to do is to say set to do, then I'll pass it data like so. So now I can go into this card component and then use the data. Okay, so what I will do is to pass to the card component a prop called list of to-dos. So I'll say list of to-dos, and this list of to-dos will be the to-do state. So I'll pass it this. I can now go into the card.js file and then extract the list of to-do. So I can extract this from here. And rather than returning just hello, what I'm going to do is to loop through the list of to-dos. So I'll say list of to-dos.map, and each to-do, what I would like to do is to return a UL tag, and this UL tag will contain an LI tag, and this LI tag will have to-do.content like so. So if I check the front end of the application, as you can see, I need to eat and I need to learn Flask. But then if I inspect the console, as you can see, I've got some errors because I need to provide it a key. So what I will do is to come over here and then pass it a key prop with the ID to be to-do.id. Now this error should be gone. So we know that everything has been integrated well and everything is working. The next step will be to create the form component, which will allow the user to input data, and that data will then be stored in the database. Let's see how this is done. To create a form, instead of my components directory, I'll create a directory called form, and inside of this form directory, I'll create a form.js file. Then I'll go on to say import React from React. Then I'll create a component called form, which is a functional component. And what this functional component will do is that it will return a fragment, and this fragment will contain a form which has 2 input fields. One is a test input field and one is a submit field. The next thing I will do is to make sure that the user puts something inside of the input field. So I'll set required here. Now what I'll do is to export the form, and then I'll import the form inside of my to-do page. So inside of the to-do page, what I'll do is to copy this and change this to form, and components, this has to be form, and then I'll render the form component right here. So now if I check the browser, I should have a form and the list of to-dos. But as you can see, I'm not able to track whatever I type in here, and that needs to change. And what I will do is to set some state inside of my to-do page. So I will come over here and I'll say const add to do, and I'll create something called set add to do, and these will be states. So use state, which is initially an empty string. And the next thing I'm going to do is to pass these states as a prop to the form. So inside of the form component, what I'll pass is called the user input, and I'll set the user input to the add to do. Then I can go into the form component and then extract the user input. So I'll copy this, then I'll paste this here. And what I will do now is to basically set the value of the input field to the user input state, which is initially an empty string. Right now, when I type in something, it doesn't work because I've set the state of this input field to an empty string. If I come over here and I put in Chris, This will change to create because that is the state. That is what the value of the input field is. So now I need to be able to track what the user types in the input field and set that to the state. So in the form component, I'll create an onChange prop. So onChange, and I'll set this onChange prop to something called handle change. So I'll say handle change. Now, as you can see, I've got nothing called handle change over here. Okay, so what I'll do is to create a function called handle change. So instead of my form component, I'll create a constant called handle change, and this will take in an event. For now, I'll console.log event.target.value. So I'll say console.log event.target.value. But what I actually want to happen is that when someone changes something in this input field, I want to set the state to what the person has typed in here. So instead of my to-do page, what I will do is to create a function called handle form change. So I'll create a constant called handle form change, and this will be a function. So it will set this to whatever the user types. Okay, so this will take in an input value, then I'll set add to do to that input value, and so I'll change the state of this. So now I need to pass this handle form change to the form component. So what I'll do is to create a prop call on form change, and I'll assign this on form change to this handle form change. Then I can go into my form component. So I'll copy this, then I will extract this from here. So now instead of saying console.log event.target.value, what I will do is to say on form change event.target.value. So now let's see what happens when I change something in the input field. And before I do that, I need to set this back to an empty string so that I will have the field empty. Now if I type in something here, it's still not working. Let's see something. So I'll inspect, and as you can see, there's an error. So I might have spelled something wrongly. So I'll go back into VS Code and then change this to onChange. So it's a capital C. Now I'll go back to the browser. So now if I type in something here, it works. Okay, and I can actually console.log that. So console.log add to do, so which is actually the state. So now if I change something in the input field, as you can see, I get those logged over here. So we know that we are able to track the state and what the user types in over here. Now let's find a way to handle submit. Now to handle submit, I'll do something similar. So I'll come into the form.js file, and inside of the form.js file, what I'll do is to create a function called handle submit. So I'll say const handle submit, and what this handle submit will do is that it will take in an event, and I'll say event prevent default, which will stop it from posting, so submitting. On the form, I'll create a prop called onSubmit, and I'll assign to this onSubmit prop handle submit, like so. So currently, if I say I want to sleep and I click on submit, nothing happens. But what I actually want to happen is that I want to send this data to the Flask server and then store that in the database. So in order to do that, when I click on submit, what I need to actually do is to send a post request to the server and then store the data in the database. So what I will do is basically go into the to-do page and then create a function that will do this for me. Okay, so I will say handle form submit, and this will be a function that will fetch to /API/, and I know I haven't created this endpoint, but I'll call this endpoint create because I want to use this endpoint to create a new to-do. Okay, and the method that I'll specify is a post method. So I'll say method, and I'll set the method to post. Then I'll set the body, the key, to be JSON.stringify. So JSON.stringify is used to convert the body into JSON. And I'll say content. Then I'll set the content to basically the add to do. So what I'm saying is that when a user types in something here and the person clicks on submit, get the data that the person types in here and then send that data to /API/create. And what I will do is that I'll pass this as a prop to the form. So I'll go to the form, then I'll say on form submit, then I'll pass it the handle form submit. I'll come over here, extract that, and then when someone submits the application, what I want to do is to call this method. So I haven't actually created this endpoint. So what I will do is to go into the Flask application and create this endpoint. So now instead of the Flask application, what I will do is to create a method called create. So def create, and it has to be at app/API/create. Then I'll set the methods to post. The next thing I'll do is that I'll create a variable called request data, and the request data will be the data that I get from the request. So I need to import request from Flask. So the request data will be request.data, and that will basically give me what the user puts in here. It will give me the body of the request. Okay, that is the request data. And what I need to do is to convert the request data into a Python dictionary. So what I'll do is to import JSON from Flask. So I'll say JSON, then I'll convert this to a Python dictionary by saying JSON.loads request data. Now that I've converted this to a Python dictionary, what I'll do is to say that to do is the instance of to do. So it's the instance of this to do model, and the content will be the request data, and I want to extract the content field from the request data. So I'll say content like so. The next thing I'll do is to add this to the session. So I'll say db.session.add to do. Then I'll say db.session.commit like so. And then what I actually want to happen is that when the db is committed, I want to return a dictionary with a key 201, which means it has been created, and then a message saying to do created successfully like so. Now if I go back to the React application, inside of the to do page, what I can actually do is to set the headers and then handle the response. So what I'll do is that here I will say headers, which will be a JavaScript object with the content. Now set the content type to application/JSON. Charset will be UTF-8. But then what I want to happen is that I want to get the response, return the response.json. I need to get rid of this. But then the message will be console.log message for now. So the message will actually be this. So what is actually being returned when I post to the /API/create route. So now let's see what happens if this is actually created, and then we can go on and build on top of it. So now if I come to the browser, then I inspect, then I say I need to shower, and I click submit. It says handle submit is not a function. So let's see what is happening, and then we can fix that. Okay, so I passed handle submit over here instead of on form submit. So what I will do is to copy this, go to the form, then change this to on form submit, then change that to on form submit like so. Now let's try again. So now if I say I need to learn Python, and I click on submit, it says response.json is not a function. So let's see what is happening again. Okay, so it's JSON like so. And as you can see, I need to learn Python here. So now you say I need to sleep, and I click on submit. I get to do created successfully. Okay, but as you can see, this is not cleared when I click on submit. So now let's make a change so that this is cleared when I submit. To do this, what I'm going to say is that console.log the message, and then I'll set the set add to do to an empty string. So I'll say set add to do, and I'll set this to an empty string like so. So now let's try again. If I say I need to learn Java, it is cleared now. So now we know that everything is working. But as you can see, if I type in I need to sync, then I click on submit, the front end is not updated immediately. I always have to refresh this to make this happen. So what I need to do now is that when I submit something, I need to make a fetch request to the backend again and get the latest to do. So how I do that is basically by saying const get latest to do's, which will also be a function, and I'll fetch from /API, but then response, if response.ok, return response.json, but then the data will be set to do, then I'll pass it the data like so. So now if I go back to the browser, then I say I need to shit, and I click submit, it gets updated immediately. Now let me get rid of these bullet points, and I can do that by saying inside of my app.css, what I'm going to do is to set the list style type to none. So currently on the main page, I have a list of to do, but I cannot click on them. Okay, I do not have a page that shows just one single to do. So what I'll do is to go back to the Flask application and create a show route that will give me each to do. So inside of the Flask application, I'll create another function called show, and this show will take an ID, and I'll say at app.root/API/int ID. When someone goes to the /API/an ID, what I want you to do is to query the database. So I will say return JSONify. I will unpack the map, then I'll pass it the to-do serializer, and what I will do is to say that to-do.query.filter, and I want to filter by ID, and the ID will be the ID that is sent in the GET request. So basically, if someone goes to /API with an ID, what I want to do is to query the database and filter by that ID and return that thing. Now to use this on the front end, I need to be able to click on a to do in order to go to that to do. So I will have to install React routers. So to install React routers, I'll come over here and I'll copy this yarn add React router. And inside of the root of the React application where I've got the package.json, I'll say yarn add React router. And since we are building a web app, what we also need to do is to install React router DOM. So I'll come over here and I'll say yarn add React router DOM. So now that React router has been installed, what I'll do is to go into my application, and then inside of my app.js file, I need to import some things from React router DOM. So I'll come over here, then I'll copy this, go into the application, then I'll paste that here. So what I've done is that I've imported browser router, switch, routes, and link from React router DOM. So now, instead of just returning a div with the to-do page component, what I will do is that I will wrap this inside of a router. So what I will say is that router, and inside of this router, I will have a switch, which is basically this. Okay, so the router is this, and I'll have a switch, which is that. So what a switch does is that a switch looks through its children routes and renders the first one that matches the current URL. So basically that's what a switch does. And inside of this switch, I'll have a route. And this route, I'll specify a path. And I'm telling React that if the path is slash, what I want you to do is to render the to-do page like so. So now I can get rid of this and I'll copy this whole thing. And I'll put this whole thing inside of the div like so. So now if I come over here and I say /about, as you can see, I still get this page because the exact match that the thing can find is the slash, and the slash results to the to-do page. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do is to create a show page, which will enable me to do something like /1, and then I can get one to do. So to build the show page, what I'll do is to come over here, and inside of my pages, what I'm going to create is a show page file. So I'll say show.js. Now inside of this show page, what I need to do is to import React from React. Then I'll create a functional component called show. And what this component will do is that it will have some state. Okay, so I'll have const to do, then I'll have set to do, and the state will be use state. So what I actually want to happen is that if a person comes over here and a person clicks on I need to eat, I want to make a fetch request to the Flask server and then get the data for this to do. Okay, so what I need to do is that inside of the show page, I need to import use state and then use effect from React. And then I will say that use effect, which takes in a function, and I'll say that if someone clicks on each to do, what I want you to do is to fetch from /API/ an ID that I will provide you, okay? And I need to define this ID. Now I can only get this ID from the URL, and React Router comes with something called use params. So React Router comes with a hook called use params, okay? And this use params will enable me to get something from the URL. So I'm going to use params to get the ID from the URL. So to use params, what I'll do is to copy this, come over here, and then get rid of all of that because I don't really need them. And then what I can say is that const ID, because the use params is an object, so I'm extracting the ID from that object, will be use params. So now I have the ID, okay? So I'm making a fetch request to /API/ with the ID, and that will obviously make a request to this endpoint. So it will make a request to this endpoint. Then I'm saying that then response, I want the response, the JSON, then data, I want to set to do, so this, and I want to set that to the data that I get. And then what I will say is that if the ID changes, I want you to make a new request, okay? So if this ID changes, what I want you to do is I want to make a new request and get me a new data. And what I would like to return is basically a div, and I'll say to do.length. If it's greater than 0, then what I want you to do is to map. So I'll say to do.map the data, and I want a div with the data.content like so. So now I can export this, and then I can use that inside of my app.js file. So I'll go into the app.js file, and what I need to do is to import the show page. So I'll say import pages and show like so. The next step will be to wrap this in the root. So I'll copy this, paste that here, and instead of saying to do page, I'll say show like so. And then now the path will be / with something called ID, okay? Because I need to pass an ID to this URL. So it is no longer /, it is / with an ID. Now let's see how this works. If I go to the browser, everything is working, and I type in /1, see what happens? It doesn't work because switches will match the first thing that matches the /. And the first thing that matches the / is the root to /. So to stop this from happening, what I need to do is to pass the root to the / URL an exact prop like so. And now I can try again. Now I get I need to eat. And if I put in /4, I get I need to sleep. And if I put in /2, I get I need to learn Flask. So what is exactly happening in the show page? Now, as you can see, I passed in a number 1. If I hit enter, it changes. If I put in 4, it changes. So basically, this number is the ID. Okay, so this number is grabbed from the URL, and it is passed as a parameter to the /API endpoint, and then I get the data for that. And once that ID changes, I make another fetch request, and I use the data to populate the div. So that is basically what's happening inside of the show page. I still cannot click on these to-dos. So what I need to do is to make these a link. And when I click on I need to eat, I will be redirected to /1, which is I need to eat. To do this, I'll use link from React Router DOM. So I'll go into my card component. And inside of this card component, what I'll do is that I'll import link. And inside of the card, rather than saying an li tag of to do the component, what I'll do is to wrap this inside of a link. Okay, so I'll have the li tag, and I'll also have a link. So I'll say link. Then since to get to the show page, so if I go to the app.js file, in order to get to the show page, I need to pass it an ID. Okay, I need to pass it an ID. What I'll do is to pass this an ID, and that can be passed with a to prop, and I can specify this to be to do dot ID, like so. So now if I go back to the browser and I go to /, these are all links. So if I click on this, I get taken to I need to eat. If I click back and I click on this, I get taken to I need to learn Flask. If I go back and I click on this, I get taken to I need to sleep. The next thing I'm going to do is to build in the ability for users to delete a to-do. So in order to do that, what I'll do is to come into my app.py file. And what I'll say is that at app, the root /API with a number, which I will specify as ID. The method should be post. Then I'll define this method to be delete, and it will take in that ID that I pass here. And when I get the ID, what I want to do is to say request data will be JSON, the loads, which as I mentioned earlier is used to convert JSON into Python dictionary, and I'll pass in the request.data. The next thing I'll do will be to query the database. So I'll say to do.query filter by, and I'll filter by the ID that the user passes. The next thing I'll do to make this persist will be to actually delete it from the database. So I'll say db.session.commit. Then I'll return a dictionary with a 204 key set to deleted successfully. So what I've basically done is to create a function called delete. This function takes in an ID, which is the ID that the user passes. I convert the request body into a Python object. I query the database to filter by the ID that the user passes, then I delete it. Then actually delete it from the database using the db.session.commit. Then I return this object saying 204 deleted successfully. The next thing I will do will be to build a delete component inside of the React application. So I'll close this, come over here, and then inside of the component, what I'll do is to create a directory called delete. Then inside of this delete directory, I'll create a delete.js file. Then I'll create a component called delete, which is a functional component. And all it does is that it returns a React fragment with a button. Then I'll export this. So what I need to actually do is that when I click on the delete button, I want to make a push request to the Flask server and actually delete the data from the database. So I'll create a function called delete to do. And what this function will do is that it will fetch to /API / an ID that I'll provide. The method will be post, and then the body will be JSON, the stringify ID, which is the ID. But the question is, where do I get this ID from? Now I need to pass the ID when I click on delete, so I know that it will be passed in as a prop. So I'll pass this ID to it later on inside of the page. Then what I want to happen is that I will say that then response.json, then data. What I want you to do is to console the log, the data, so the message, and then I want to be redirected to the /URL. And I can do that using the use history that React Router DOM provides. So I'll say import use history from React Router DOM. So I'll come over here and I'll create a constant called history, and I'll set this as use history, like so. And after I've logged the data, what I'll do is that redirect me, so history.push to slash. So use history is also a hook, and what it does is that it gives you the instance or the history instance of the route that you want to navigate to. So now I have this component built. What I can do is to use this inside of the show page. Okay, so I'll go into the show page, and inside of this page I'll say import. I want to import delete from components / delete, like so. And then over here I can use that component, so I can say delete, then I'll pass it the prop ID, which will basically be the ID, so the ID that is provided over here. And whilst I'm here, let me create an HR tag which will link me back to the to-dos. So I'll say link, and I will say back to to-dos, and this link will have a to prop which will take me to the slash route. So now I need to import link from React router. So now if I go to the browser and I click on I need to eat, I can delete this. It's not working, so let's see, inspect and see what's happening. I can come over here, then I can give it a key, and I can set the key to ID. Okay, so now this is not working, and rightfully it shouldn't work because I haven't set the on click button. So what I need to do is to say, if this button is clicked, so on click, I would like to call this method, so delete to do, like so. And now if I go back to the browser and I do delete, so it's not working because I said data, this has to be data, okay? Because it's the requested data. So now if I go back to the application, then I click on delete, it gets deleted. It says deleted successfully. So if I click on I need to learn Flask and I click delete, it gets deleted as well. If I click on this and I click on back to to-dos, I get redirected back to the to-do page. The next thing I'll do is to create the edit button. So when I click on this one, I need to be able to edit a to-do. But I'm not going to do that. I will leave it up to you to do it, because it is always easy when you watch someone do it than to actually do it yourself. So try to build the edit button, and then when you click on the edit button, you'll be taken on a page which will allow you to edit and save. If you have any questions regarding that, don't hesitate to ask me. So the last thing I'm going to do is to actually create the animation. And what I will use for this is React-Sping. If you don't know how to use React-Sping, I've got lots of tutorials on that. You can check them out. But I'll come over here and copy this. And inside of the roots of the React application, I'll do yarn add React-Sping. What I would like to animate is the card component. So I'll come into the card component. And what I'll actually do is to import use transition from React-Sping. So I'll say import use transition and then animated from React-Sping. Then I'll go on and create the spring that I want. So I'll say const, and as you know, use transition, I need to pass it the number of springs that I want. And the number of springs that I want will be the list of to-dos and list of to-dos.id. And I need to provide it with the CSS that I want. So basically what I'm doing is I'm using use transition from React-Sping. And the use transition, the first thing that it takes is that it takes in the list of to-dos. The second thing is a function that returns the list of to-dos.id. And then an object, which is the from and enter. And instead of returning a list of to-do.map, what I'm going to actually do is to return this. So now if I go into the application, as you can see, everything gets animated. So if I go here and I delete, things are now animated. If I say I need to dance, everything gets animated now. And that's basically it. So what we've looked at is how to use Flask as a REST API for a React application, connect Flask to React, and build a to-do application which allows you to add to a to-do, click on a to-do, which we are able to do that using React routers, able to delete from a to-do, and be able to edit, which I've left up to you to do it. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.